Okay, hi. We are here with Paul Vanderbroeck, and we're here to talk about your book, Paul. Lead Like Julius Caesar: Timeless Leadership Lessons from History's Most Influential Leader. Now, before we jump in, I do want to say a few things about you, right? You are an executive and leadership coach, and you've been doing this for over 2 decades, so a lot of experience. You have a PhD in history, and you have this ability to combine these two areas to help the rest of us learn valuable lessons from really influential people in history that can be applied in coaching, can be applied by leaders, but there's a lot of value to those lives and you help us see those. You have written several books, not just this one of which I think is really interesting, Leadership Strategies for Women, where you talk about the leadership strategies of Cleopatra, Isabella of Spain, Elizabeth I, and Catherine the Great. So a lot of valuable lessons there. So I am so happy to have you here. And are you ready to jump right in, Paul?
Yes, I'm absolutely. And thank you so much for the invitation, Maria. It's a great pleasure and a true honor to be interviewed by an expert like yourself as part of the MRG group. So I'm really pleased to be here and I look forward to your questions.
Okie dokie. Thank you, Paul. No, I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so I'm glad we finally get to talk about it. So we're here to talk about, and I'm so glad you have the picture of the book behind you, Lead Like Julius Caesar. So I guess let's start talking about why Julius Caesar, right? A lot has been written about him. Why did you decide to write about him, and how does this book fit into, that vast literature on Julius Caesar?
Yes, thank you. So, to be honest, I had my doubts in the beginning too whether this would add some value. But I mean, I've encountered Julius Caesar in a way throughout my career. First, he was one of the people I researched in my history dissertation. And then afterwards, when I started to combine leadership with history, I came across him a few times, including in the book you just referred to as Cleopatra's boss. Over the years, I got to know more of him and I saw that he's a much more multidimensional, complex person than I originally thought. And so I think and that's why I thought it would be worthwhile to do a leadership case study, what was
Mhm.
essentially the book is about him, but in a different way, and also to add value to that indeed vast literature that has been written about him. And yeah, the new thing is that I apply several modern leadership theories and models to Julius Caesar, including from MRG about motivation. And I think through that, I've been really able to bring something new to the table, not as much historically, but much more from the point of view of him as a leader and what we can learn.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, right? It's you're taking more contemporary views of leadership and motivation and looking at his life through that lens, which is absolutely a valuable thing for all of us. So, is there anything about the current time that makes his life, more relevant than it may have been 20 years ago? Is there yeah, tell me about the relevance of this story right now.
Yeah, so I think there are two things which, if you first of all look at the business world, then everybody talks about things like VUCA and on the
Ugh.
volatility and complexity that this world has become, particularly in the 21st century, but also new technology and so forth. So,
Mhm.
for all sense and purposes, Caesar led in an ancient VUCA time. In that regard, there are also a lot of things happen, new things happen, and that's why it's a very contemporary type of leadership, you could say, from a business perspective. Then there's the other type of leadership
Mhm.
in politics, and that was not really my intention, but by coincidence, this book comes out in a time where, yeah, let's say as it's called, the strong man in fashion, and I think that it started with Corona, where for all
Mhm.
kinds of reasons we see leaders come in power, mostly men, with this type of strong top-down leadership, authoritarian sometimes, to be en vogue nowadays. Yeah, this
Mhm.
case contribute also something that if it only is that, well, if you want to have or be a strong man, you might as well learn from a pretty competent one, which was Julius Caesar.
That's such a great point, right? If that's your approach, then learn from the best, of course, and the most competent. I really like that. So I know you do this and you're really good at it, but how's the process of getting into someone's head? So I know you talk about his leadership behaviors, which are more overt, right? And that might be a little easier to explain because you have accounts from others about how he behaved. But you also talk about his motivation, right? And you have to do a little more of that getting into his head work. So tell me about that process, what you go through to do
Yeah,
that.
so it starts indeed with his behavior. I mean, to first analyze and catalog his
Mm,
behaviors, both successful and less successful ones. And once you have that, at least that's why I looked at, why did he do what he did, the good things and also the bad things, and look for reasons and motivations. And
mhm,
now leaders do things for rational reasons, but also for less rational reasons, because they're loyal to an organization or to people and they want to do something for them. In my executive coaching practice, I've also learned that there are even deeper motivations behind there, which are, to be honest, much more selfish, where people do things because that's really what they want to do, or whether because
mhm,
there's something which they don't like to do, and irrespective of whether that's useful or not, they do it. And so that helped me also with MRG's instrument, helped me to ask the questions to those behavior and the events and see, okay, can we discover something
mhm.
behind what we know what happened, look into the reasons, that the motivations that Caesar had to do that.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So it's kind of building that motivation from the behavior, especially when you see behaviors that occur a lot. There must be some underlying motivator that's
And particularly,
potentially leading to that.
yeah, particularly indeed, I should say, things that occur a lot, and particularly if you see things happen, similar
Hmm.
things over time, similar behaviors, and particularly the behaviors which happen over time and are not
Hmm.
so helpful, are
Uh-huh.
interesting. You think, why does it person? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great, yeah, yeah. I really like that explanation, right? Or that reasoning, right? Why would someone keep doing something that's not helpful?
Yeah.
There must be something underlying, something under the hood, something that's pushing them in that direction. That's a really, really great approach. So let's talk a little bit about kind of how motivation shaped his life, and you use the individual directions inventory to dive deeper into his motivation, and that measures 17 dimensions. Of course, the book goes into all of them in detail and describes how each of them would have influenced his life. But I guess more broadly, right? And you talked about this a little bit already, but sometimes when our motivators are high, like we're really motivated by something like winning, right? Beating out the competition, being the one who emerges as a champion, or gaining stature, right? Receiving external recognition, right? And those are two things that you found were most likely high motivators for Julius Caesar. How did those get him in trouble? And how did they help him? Like, how did that shape his leadership and his life trajectory?
So first of all, because of this search for recognition and also for excellence, which is another motivator, the governor needed to be really, really good for Julius Caesar, and including this winning, this competitive, so to speak. First of all, made him into a very hard worker. I mean, he
Uh-huh.
was really constantly motivated to bring good results, and so that also part of his success story, because yeah, he had this ambition and willingness to really achieve something. On the other hand, particularly because possibly these motivations were not totally his own, they were sort of had also to do with the upbringing and the education he received. So in that respect, he also continued even when it was perhaps not longer that necessary, but because he felt he had to do it, and by
Hmm.
lack of, for let's say, a very personal motivation, which he might have pursued as well. The
Hmm.
other thing which gets him into trouble with those excellences and competition is that, yeah, how do the people working for him feel about that, who may have different motivation that can lead to pushing people too far in getting them to work. And the last thing I would like to say about it, and it's a very clear thing with Caesar, with this competition and also this recognition and excellent results you want to achieve, he found it difficult to compromise because
Uh-huh.
he's the standards very high and also wants to win. It's very difficult to, on the one hand, to accept something which is, let's say, lesser quality, but and at the same time allows the other party to gain something as well in a negotiation or a dispute or so forth.
So that's interesting, right? So it's somehow his motivators when they contrasted or were different from those of the people around him, the people working with him, that led to friction. But he, of course, I mean, he was a leader, so my way, kind of his way, is the way that won. Do you think the people he surrounded himself with, right, who had a different perspective, perhaps different motivational profiles, less of a need to win or gain recognition or any of those different areas, were they able to shift his behavior at times? Do you think he relied perhaps on a thinking partner that would kind of call him out on some of these things? Yeah, how did you
Yeah,
see that at all in the
I
story?
think that happened more earlier in his career than later in his career. So, I
Oh.
mean, he went several times to Spain to govern part of Spain for the Roman Empire, as was part of the Roman career system.
Mhm.
Uh, and particularly the first and the second time, which was still early on in his career, he learned a lot of a person who became a good colleague of him throughout the career, a local person, Spaniard called Balbus. And I
Mhm.
think from him about the culture and the needs of the people there, and because of that, Caesar was able to do things there which were more sustainable from the point of governance than were the standard Roman exploitation of the colony, so to speak. But he knew, and he carried that on through the rest of his career. However, later in his career, I think he still had very good people around him, including that same Spanish person, but he was
Mhm.
less open to their feedback on the one hand, and also on the
Mhm.
other hand, the people around him gave him less feedback because with the self-confidence he showed and the success he had, they thought, well, he probably doesn't need our feedback, so you will find out things on your own, and that became also ultimately detrimental at the end of his career.
So he was a little more set in his ways, I guess, and less likely to listen to that input
Yeah, and there's also
later on.
the other thing to talk about another direction, receiving.
Mhm.
He it seems not to be very open to support and feedback and help from others, more self-reliant. And if you show that attitude, then particularly if you're a leader, the people around you, below you, are less
Mhm.
inclined to give you that feedback.
That's really interesting because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about next, right? So you've got the high motivators where they're more automatic responses, and those are the things that would have driven him. But then with the lower motivators, like receiving, which you brought up, receiving support, receiving help and affection, and essentially support from others, he was less motivated by that. So you just mentioned a potential drawback from that, right? Not being open to receiving that feedback, that support in the form of feedback. How may that have helped him, right? Being lower receiving, not being as motivated by receiving support and help and affection from others as other people maybe.
Well, there were a situation when he was very much on his own, from which he came out successfully. Early in his career, for example, he had to, for political reasons, he had to take flight from Rome and hide himself because he was pursued by political opponents. It was the end of the Civil War. And yeah, he survived that and came out of it winning. And another example, some years later, when he was traveling to go to study on a Greek island, he
Uh,
was kidnapped by pirates for a while. And yeah, was all on his own and managed to come out of that situation perfectly well, negotiating with the pirates, getting out and coming back to punish the pirates for what they had did. So he felt very comfortable on his own and take his own decisions in such even very risky situations.
Mhm. So yeah, so made him a little more self-reliant, self-sufficient, being able to kind of
Yeah.
figure stuff out on his own. So it's a mixed bag, right? With any of these motivators, there's good and there's bad that comes regardless of where they
Yeah.
are on the range. Do you feel that he was aware of those motivators? Were there blind spots? I mean, and I know this is a really hard question to answer without being
Yeah.
able to talk to Caesar and say, "Hey, tell me about this." So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So he has written a lot, huh? So he has written diaries and some letters and some speeches, but in those he never really talked about it, at least not in a way of showing his inner feelings. So I think he was, at least perhaps not consciously, but certainly unconsciously aware of it, and also put himself in situations where he felt more comfortable with, for example, as we just talked about, this autonomy which he enjoyed in his career. He tried to position himself as many cases as possible in a situation where he was on his own, far away from Rome, and could decide his own things. So he did work with that, but not in a very conscious way, I think.
Okay. Did any of the motivators surprise you when, you were going through this? I don't know, something that stood out to you as, well, this really is kind of the essence of Julius Caesar, or I wasn't expecting to score him so high or so low on this.
Yeah, so the low expressing I found surprising, because he is a person who, as I said, has written a lot, spoken a lot, speech, is known by his contemporaries as being somebody who was an excellent public speaker. His writings were widely read and were written in a way which were very accessible. But when you look at it, it didn't really show his personality. So really, an expression is also about what you really think and feel. And if that's your motive to enjoy that, but that was certainly not the case in Julius Caesar. And I think that some of the bad times he went through when he was a child had something to do with that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so he was a little guarded, perhaps, or just not really motivated to express emotion openly. And you bring up a really interesting point about motivation, right? It's based on our experiences, and those start in early childhood. So some of those early experiences that he had would have definitely influenced his motivators for the rest of his life, especially if they were really, really important and influential at that point of his life. So I would like to switch to kind of leadership practices and how his leadership evolved, right? So, if you were to describe which practices were instrumental in his, say, early leadership, right? What do you think was most helpful, right, to set him off on his career as an influential
Yeah, I
leader?
think that he was a doer. So the activities, early jobs where he really could do operational work. And if he got a, for example, got a staff position where he had to do some financial administration in what's now modern Turkey, where Rome had also a few provinces, and they worked in the provincial administration. He seized the opportunity of a local war starting to get involved in that and help stop that rebellion and actually go into the action. And there are several cases like that in his early days. So, and while doing that, he also, which is part of his personality, he enjoyed taking risks, but by doing that, he learning opportunities, and yeah, that he's taking that with him for the rest of his career.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And you mentioned him taking risks. You have him at mid-range stability, right? That need for things to remain stable and not and reduce surprises. But with it being mid-range, right? There's a level of comfort, right? Just not for everything, but he had a level of comfort with risk. So being a doer is what really helped him at the beginning. How did that evolve? Right? How, is that that a practice he carried throughout his leadership,
Well,
or?
what's interesting, and it's a great question you're asking, because yeah, he carried that with him. And what you see then is what's helpful early in your career is not necessarily helpful later in your career. So
Okay.
he was a doer and enjoyed that. He kept on doing that, which is to a certain level okay, but he did too much of it. What I mean to say, he was not particularly good at delegating.
Oh.
So the tendency, if you delegated something and the person in the military office, for example, did not achieve the excellent results Caesar would normally want to achieve, instead of developing that person, he would shift him aside and take over himself.
So in his context, being a doer helped him out initially, then got him in perhaps a little trouble down the road. What were the practices that helped him in his more senior leadership days that were actually helpful?
Yeah, so I mean, he was innovative without being a revolutionary. Some people think he created, he killed the Republic and created the Roman Empire and moving to a monarchical system. That's not the case that happened afterwards. But he did do a number of reforms in the Roman state, but they were all meant to keep the system as it was intact while improving it. In those improvements, he was rather innovative, particularly when he had the power in the later stage of his career. He did some very substantial things in a way that nobody else would have come up with.
So what, given what you've learned about those leadership practices and what was beneficial throughout his career, and I know you don't want to give away too much about the book, but what's some good advice for someone who's starting out in leadership or someone who has leadership potential who wants to be a powerful leader and have opportunities for growth?
Yes, and I like to combine that with my own experience. I've worked with many leaders, but including young potentials quite a lot. And what you can learn from Caesar is the importance of this operational experience early in a career. There's, particularly in larger organizations, there is a tendency to start a career with staff positions where you're specialist and coming up with advice rather than doing things. And whereas that is absolutely helpful to get to know the organization, the business, and also the type of work and create a network and so forth, it's very important to start that actually doing experience, and perhaps even ideally, like Caesar, away from the headquarters. I think it's
That's really, yeah, get that different perspective from as early as possible. And then what did, well, what, I'm going to kind of turn that around. So what shouldn't rising leaders be doing? Or what might potentially create more problems and be helpful?
Yeah, so you have to, let's say, know when to say things and know when not to say things, and know when to keep your mouth shut. I mean, there was this famous example of Caesar where the dictator Sulla, who had won the civil war, wanted him to divorce his young wife because the wife was part of the family of the dictator's enemies. And he said to Caesar, look, I mean, okay, you can stay here, Rome and so forth, but I want you to get rid of your wife. And that's it. And Caesar said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he said it in such a way that the dictator became extremely angry. And that's the example I gave earlier. Caesar had to run away from Rome in order not to get killed. So it's about when to say something, how to say something, and also when not to say something to who are in power. And I think with that is, I mean, you cannot reproach somebody at very early in their career to sort of spontaneously do or say certain things. But in such situation, and that's what Caesar, again, he was not particularly open to feedback also as a young man. It would also be helpful just to, before you take a decision, say check with somebody more senior and see where the land lies. So that you can,
Yeah, that is really good advice. How about for more senior leaders? What are some valuable lessons from Caesar, right? What practices, are there stories that they should know?
Yeah, so Caesar was really good at recruiting diverse talent, which in his case meant particularly people who didn't have the necessary social background or status that would normally give them a job as a military officer or a junior political position. But he was very good to enlist those people with talent, and it became part of his success to rely on those people, and perhaps had a stronger bench strength of talent than others picky with regard to people's background.
So he was kind of ahead of his time in realizing that diversity of perspective and background and all of that was really helpful. How about, I don't want to forget the folks in the middle, right? Those managers of managers and so on. What lessons could they learn from Caesar's story?
So I think what they can learn is to build a career consciously, to be aware what you need to do in your current job to get the next job. Caesar was good at not always, but most of the time, performing very well in the job he did, but he also taught how to build the network and the reputation and the brand that could get him to that next job and get a promotion.
Like really get a hang of things and like, yeah, when you're in it, really take it seriously, learn the work that's required.
To others, or at least give them the feeling that, yeah, I'm capable of greater things. I'm ready for the next steps.
Yes, yeah, no, that's really good. And I think a lot of younger leaders are looking for the next promotion, right? And kind of not skipping to that next step, but focus on where you are now and really get a grasp of that for that. And then the next step is going to be more likely as well. So what's going to stick with you from everything that I mean, this is a great project. I know you spent a lot of time on it. What's the big lesson, or what are the big lessons? What's going to stick with you for years after writing
Yeah,
this
so
book?
I think that there are two things which you can also say surprise me most in Julius Caesar is on the one hand that, with the many leaders I've worked with, those who are good or who benefit from leadership development are able to leverage their strengths in the sense of, and then often you get better results if you use the strengths you already have in a different way or in a
Mhm.
broader way than at all cost trying to improve your weaknesses. But Caesar is at a level of potential which goes a step further. And that's
Uh-huh.
something we rarely see, is that a leader who's able to change the context, to adapt the circumstances in such a way that, in this case, he could apply his strengths. So one thing is
Mhm.
to do more with your strengths in a particular situation, but the next level is really to change that situation to circumstance that your strengths can be applied. The other thing has also to do with strengths in the sense of that at the end of the career, and that was also the reason why ultimately he was assassinated, is that a certain level, if you are very good at something, you can become too good. And then
Mhm.
you rely on that too much, and that it becomes the overused strength, which then backfires.
Mhm.
And it's important to realize, well, perhaps there are situations, particularly at the very senior levels, where you may need to tone down your biggest strengths in order to have a more broader focus of your leadership capability and your leadership behavior.
And was that his biggest mistake then,
Well,
over relying on those things that he was really
yeah,
good at?
because one of his weaker points was his emotional intelligence, and particularly when it comes to group, he didn't really grasp what's happening under the surface because he didn't get much feedback. He sensed that there were people thinking that he was going too fast, that they were afraid of his power, that they thought that their own opportunities, career opportunities, would never happen because he had all the power. So, and Caesar sensed that was something going on, but not really what. So he doubled down,
Uh-huh.
went faster with his strengths, change, execution, great results, which was all fine. But the buy-in was missing up to the point that some people are together and stab him in the back, quite literally.
Yes. So there, yeah, there's a lesson there in keeping your eyes and ears open, right? So listening to input and being, yeah, kind of keeping your finger on the pulse, kind of
Yeah, and
gauging where
well
people
done.
are and building a message based on that.
Doing this, I'm really good at this. It's bringing great results. But is
Hmm.
it the right thing to do? Is there something I'm missing? And yeah.
Yeah, yeah, inviting others into the decision making so that he sees other points of view. Absolutely, he would have seen other points of view. Wow, Paul, this has been so interesting. I've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for joining me today so that we could have this conversation. And I would like to encourage everyone to check out the book. We'll have a link to purchase the book, but you can get it in any of the online stores, right?
In hard copy and in online versions if you prefer. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Maria. It was a pleasure, and thank you for your questions that helped me also in my thinking, and it was great talking to you.
Thanks.